And I am reading Harris and Me by Gary Paulsen, and we are on chapter, look at my crazy hair. We are on chapter 11, in which Harris discovers speed and the value of clothing. Here's the problem. It's too slow. Hell, we can ride Bob and Bill and go faster. I could have pointed out that since the loft and shotgun incidents, there had been absolutely no way we could get close enough to Bob or to Bill to touch them, let alone ride them. But it had not been long since lightning had hit Harris's business, so arguing with him about things seemed too harsh. Harris still walked with his legs apart a little bit. Besides, I agreed with him. We had pulled 2 old bicycles from the junk heap and worked almost 3 days loosening the chains, oiling them, fixing tubes and pumping tires, twisting and aligning handlebars and greasing bearings, all just to ride up and back on the quarter-mile driveway. Initially, I had in mind a fantasy involving getting a bike fixed and then pedaling the 4 miles to Elaine's farm. I had seen her once since the night she'd learned about my brain being late getting into the light at another Saturday night dance. And while I apparently still loved her with all my heart, or so it felt, judging by my breathing and pulse, she only smiled. Again, not unkindly, but otherwise ignored me completely. Love is persistent, however, at least in the imagination, and my brain, light and feebled as it may have been, would not stop thinking of her golden hair, blue eyes, even smile, and soft voice. So the fantasies ran. I would fix a bike. I would pedal to her farm, though I had no idea where it was. And coming out to the mailbox, she would see me pedaling by and stop and talk to me and find out that my brain was all right and smile at me the other way. And we would kiss and we would get married and we would ... All this until we actually got the bikes working and pedaled the length of the driveway and back, grinding along, the wheels so out of line they wobbled, the tires bulging at the sides. After one loop, I thought less of love and more of the possible terminal effects of trying to pedal 4 miles, and that had brought us to Harris's trenchant remark, which he now repeated. Too slow. We need something to get these gooners moving. We need some kind of motor. He stood with his hands in the pockets of his bibs, studying the yard, and I think I had actually scanned it twice when he saw the washing machine. His eyes stopped moving, and I saw him start chewing his bottom lip. It was a habit I'd come to know as an indication that we would soon be in trouble, or more trouble than normal, but one that I also had come to view with some excitement. The washing machine was by the house. There was no electricity yet in that country, and some families still used hand washboards. But Newt and Claire had some years earlier purchased an old gas engine washer. It looked like a regular wringer washer, except that underneath it had a 1-cylinder gas motor with a tiny gas tank and a foot kickstarter that stuck out to the side. I had seen Claire and Glennis use the washer. It ran with a putt. It became a 1-speed drone controlled by a governor that cranked the washer and wringer assembly with a V-belt off a pulley on the motor. Harris wandered near the washer and studied it more closely, keeping well clear of the kitchen window where Claire and Glennis were working. She'll do her, he nodded. Do what? Pull that bicycle. The washing machine? The motor, you dope. It's only held on there by 4 bolts. We'll take her off and bolt her on a bike and rig up a belt, and off we go. Off you go, I thought, remembering the horse and shotgun, but I said nothing about it. I was also thinking of one salient fact that perhaps Harris had overlooked. The motor, I pointed out in a slightly superior air, is attached to your mother's washing machine. I know that, he said, looking at me as if I'd gone insane. We'll just have to wait until they go to town. It was then that I realized the complexity of Harris's plans. He didn't just do things as they came along, willy-nilly. Often he schemed for days, worked on them, like the time he tried to shoot a banty chicken out of an old stovepipe with compressed air. It took hours of hand pumping air into the inner tube inside a stovepipe until it was ready to burst, then getting the pipe situated and catching a chicken and jamming her down into the stovepipe. I suggested Ernie, but we couldn't find him. And even when the results didn't warrant the effort, he had feathers blown 2 inches into his nostrils when the stovepipe burst. He was optimistic about the outcome. Fastest that chicken ever flew. She had to be doing 200 when she hit my face. And the plan he set into effect now was such a long-term effort. From an old swatting machine, he found a V-belt pulley wheel about 1.5 feet across, and he used a hacksaw to cut the 4 center spokes out of it, leaving a 4-inch piece on each spoke. He then pulled the back wheel off the better of the 2 bicycles and spent hours wiring and friction taping the pulley to the spokes. By this time, I was bored and looking for other things to do. I sneaked up to the granary, as I often did, and looked at Louis's diorama and was surprised to find that he had added to it. There was a new farm with little trees and a house. And with a start, I realized it was our farm. He'd done a model of the Larson place, a miniature copy of the house made of paper and cardboard with trees around it, and a model of the barn. There were figures for Claire and Glennis, the 2 of them standing by the house, and one of Newt working on a small team of horses, and another for Louis himself upright near the head of the team. And there were 2 more figures near the hog pen playing in the dirt. Harris and me. There was a figure for me. A strange feeling came over me seeing the figure. I somehow had never belonged, always felt like a visitor. And though we were related, I never thought of myself as part of the family in some way. I considered myself more an observer than an outsider, a friend who watches. The figure made my role different, carved it in time. I wasn't just a visiting second cousin. I was somebody, a part of this place, this family. I belonged. I picked up the figure that represented me and looked more closely at it. It was wearing a mouse hair coat and had a smile and white teeth inside the little smile. It couldn't have looked less like me, but at the same time, made me think more of myself, my life, than anything ever had before, and I was crying when I set it down, crying to myself, thinking that I felt like I was home. What's wrong? Harris was working on the bicycle when I came back down, and he saw my red eyes. Dust. I was up in the granary. Did you find him? What? Oh, no. Harris was still suffering from the purloined pictures and his sore business, and believed that Louis had hidden the pictures somewhere in the granary. Harris felt he had proprietary rights and was hoping to find the pictures and steal them back. I didn't see them. He's probably got them under something. Did you look under things? No. Well, it don't matter. Here, look at this. Ain't this a beauty? He pointed to the bike with the pulley wired taped onto the rear wheel. He had reaffixed the wheel to the rear and held it up to spin it to show that it rotated freely. I nodded dubiously. It seemed more like a rotating bandage than anything else, and I couldn't see how it would possibly work. But I didn't have Harris's enthusiasm and optimism, couldn't see the big picture as well as he did. He had also manufactured a crude wooden platform which was bolted above the pedals and rusty chain guard with 2 U-bolts for the motor. I nodded, but in truth, I didn't think there would ever be a chance to try it. Newt and the rest didn't go to town that often. Usually somebody stayed home. But I was wrong again. The next day, Newt fired up the truck and took Claire and Glennis to town, and Louis took the team 6 miles to a neighbor's to get the horses shod. Harris watched the grain wagon trundling off down the driveway with Louis sitting up in the high seat. He had a crescent wrench hidden behind his back, and as soon as Louis was well clear of the house, he went for that washing machine. I grabbed his suspenders and stopped him. Just so you know, I am not taking the blame this time. He won't even know he'd done it. You've done it. Yeah, they won't even know. We'll hook her in and make a few runs and put the motor back on the washing machine. Just the same, no matter what, I'm not taking the blame. He nodded. Sure, but you'll see, there won't be no problem. Of all the understatements Harris made that summer, it was perhaps the greatest. At no time during the ensuing disaster did I think the contraption would really work. I helped him unbolt the 4 bolts that held the motor to the washing machine and helped him carry it to the bike and put it on the platform. He had an old auger bit and brace and a long V-belt from the granary, one of the spares for the binder. It took him just a few minutes to remove the back wheel of the bike and loop the belt through and put the wheel back on, fit the belt into the taped pulley, and then connect it to the drive pulley on the motor. He adjusted the motor into position, marked the holes, and then augered 4 holes through the wooden platform and bolted the motor in place with the belt tight. There, he said, she ought to fly. Or blow up, I thought. How are you going to start it? The Kickstarter was up against the frame. I'll push the bike until she fires, then jump on. You be running and backing me and climb on when I get on. I'm not riding that thing. He studied me. You chicken? I'm still not riding it. He frowned. All right. We need a timer so as we can check our speed. You run get the alarm clock from the folks' bedroom. I did as he told me. It was a brass clock with 2 bells on top and a hammer that went back and forth to ring them. Take the other bike to the end of the driveway, and when I start the engine and you hear me, let her rip. And when you hear me, let her rip. You check the clock. And then when I get to the end of the driveway, you check her again, and we'll be able to figure out how fast I went. I was skeptical. My personal feelings were that he would never get the contraption out of the yard, let alone to the end of the driveway. But Harris had surprised me before, almost continuously, and so I took the other bike and dutifully pedaled to the end of the driveway and waited. And waited and waited. I checked the clock numerous times as I heard Harris trying to start the motor back in the yard. Put, and it would die. I found later that the motor died because Harris had already unhooked the governor and it was getting too much gas and was choking out. I also decided still later that it was probably God trying to save Harris from himself. But even divine intervention didn't work. And in truth, Harris was so determined, probably nothing could have saved him. Or, as Harris put it later, speaking of God, at least he could have stopped me from unhooking that stupid governor. The motor started finally with a stuttering put. And as soon as I saw Harris begin to move, I looked down at the clock. I couldn't have had my eyes down for more than 3 seconds, but when I brought them up, I was surprised to see that Harris had already moved toward me some distance. Several other things were happening by this time that would determine Harris's fate. The engine, starved of gasoline all its life on the washing machine by the medical governor, responded in explosive gratitude for the chance at freedom. It went from the subdued put to a healthy bam, bam, bam that I could hear easily from the end of the driveway. Then, too, there was the further bad luck that somehow, in some way, everything held together. Bolts, belts, and the bicycle, everything miraculously stayed in one piece, and all of the gasoline that poured into the wide open throat of the little Briggs & Stratton engine was translated into power at the back wheel. Power and speed. From that point on, everything came in flashes, flickering scenes of disaster, like watching a stop-action film of a flood or a hurricane hitting the coast of Florida. To give him his due, Harris was plucky. Early on, the Bendix brake had jammed in the chain and therefore pedals had turned with the back wheel. Harris kept his feet on the pedals, or tried to, but as the speed went up and the pedals began to turn faster, much faster than they'd ever turned, his legs became at first a blur. Then he held them up. the pedals slapping the bottoms of his bare feet as the bike approached something like terminal velocity, with Harris just along for the ride. It was amazing that nothing fell apart. As he got closer, his knees up alongside his cheeks, I could see that sense had at last come into his mind, and his eyes were wide, huge with fear. His tongue hung out the side of his mouth, spit flying, and he turned into a blur. 15, 20, 30, 40, the bike had to be doing close to 50 miles an hour when he passed me standing at the end of the driveway. "Help me!" he yelled, the Doppler effect changing the pitch of his plea as he cleared the end of the driveway, flew across in front of me, and hit the ditch on the far side of the county road like a meteorite. It was then, as he put it later, that he realized he was in trouble. Making the turn onto the road was clearly impossible, but he claims he still thought he could slow her down in the brush along the ditch. The brush slowed him all right. It stopped the bike dead in a dazzling cartwheeling spray of engine, spokes, wheels, frame, and tangled belt. For half a second, it was impossible to tell where Harris ended and the bicycle began. The whole seemed a jumbled mass of boy and machine. Then Harris separated, his body high above the brush, spread-eagled. He claimed later he could see for miles, still moving close to 50 miles an hour, then fell down, down, in a curving arc to hit the ground and explode in a flurry of willows, leaves, brush, and dirt. Then silence, broken only by the soft hissing of gas running from the tank onto the engine and the ticking of the brass alarm clock. "Harris?" Nothing. "Harris, are you all right?" A spitting sound, leaves and dirt being expelled. Then a grunt. "Hell no, I ain't all right. I was stuck in the dirt like an arrow and I'm all over scratches." "Do you need help?" I couldn't see him for the brush and willows. "Yeah, help me find my bibs." "Your pants?" "Yeah, they come off me somewhere." We looked for half an hour and more, Harris hiding twice when cars went by on the road, and we didn't find them. And we looked for another half hour, and we still didn't find them, and we never did. We finally gave up. The bike was a total loss, but the engine was cast iron and undamaged, and we put it on the seat of my bike and held it there while we wheeled it back to the yard in the washing machine. Harris walking alongside, naked as a bird and all over scratches, as he'd said. Later that night, we were lying in our beds in the dark, night birds singing outside the window. Harris whispered, "How fast was I going?" I shook my head, then realized he couldn't see me in the dark. "I don't know." "What did the clock say?" I forgot to look at it. "You forgot?" "I'm sorry. I go through this and have to tell Pa I lost my pants somewhere, and you forgot to look at the clock?" I said, "I'm sorry." There was a long quiet. "How fast do you think I was going?" I thought long before answering, remembered his eyes, his legs pumping, the motor pounding as he went by, the crash in the brushy ditch, the sight of him flying through the air, losing his pants. "At least 100. Another soft silence, then a sigh. "I thought so. The fence post looked like netting. It was really something." Yes, it was really something. And that is the end of the chapter.